During London's chaotic rush hour, when a pregnant woman collapsed helplessly onto the cold pavement, dozens of people froze. No one moved, no one helped, until a man stepped forward, a leather-clad member of Hell's Angel, covered in tattoos, a face the world had already decided to fear. He was accused, insulted, cursed at, but he didn't care. He rushed to her side and carried her to the hospital under stares as sharp as bullets, and what happened next will make you think twice. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The sky over London hung heavy with a smudged grey mist. Streetlights flickered on against the sinking sun as the clock struck 5:30. Oxford Street was alive with the usual chaos. Horns blaring, bus doors hissing open and shut, bodies weaving through gaps with impatient shoves. The smell of rain on hot asphalt and exhaust fumes wrapped the air in a thick, choking blanket. Cole Matthews sat astride his Harley, one boot planted firmly on the wet pavement, waiting at a red light. The polished chrome of his bike reflected the scattered streetlights like fractured stars. His black leather jacket, worn smooth at the elbows, clung to his broad shoulders. Tattoos peeked out from the edges of his sleeves, curling down onto calloused hands resting loosely on the handlebars. Underneath the worn black helmet, Cole's blue eyes scanned the scene in front of him. His face, hardened by years of weather and the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, remained unreadable. But behind that calm exterior, his mind ticked sharply, alert to every sudden movement, every raised voice, every shift in the crowd's energy. He had seen this city at its best and its worst, and tonight it felt like it was teetering on the edge of something. The double-decker bus next to him heaved forward with a loud groan, inching into the intersection. A cluster of pedestrians jostled for position at the crosswalk. Somewhere behind him, a taxi driver laid on his horn in frustration. Cole exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the inside of his helmet for a brief second. He glanced up at the traffic light, still red. His fingers drummed a steady, unconscious rhythm against the clutch. Despite the noise, the tension, and the low grumble of engines, something caught his attention. A ripple in the atmosphere. Subtle, but undeniable. It was instinct more than sight. He shifted his weight slightly, leaning forward just as the shriek of brakes split the air. The red double-decker in front of him had slammed to a violent stop. Bodies inside pitched forward like dominoes. Shouts rang out. Cole's eyes narrowed. Through the mass of swaying passengers inside the bus, he caught sight of her, a woman, pregnant, stumbling violently as the sudden stop threw her off balance. Her arms flailed as she tried to grab onto something, anything. The world seemed to slow for a heartbeat. Nobody moved. People froze, clutching their shopping bags, their umbrellas, their headphones, rooted to the sidewalks as if they were part of the concrete itself. Cole didn't think. His boot kicked off the asphalt, launching him off the bike. His helmet hit the ground behind him with a hollow thud. He dodged past a man in a business suit who recoiled instinctively, throwing a fearful look at Cole's tattoos. "Oi, back off," someone barked. Cole ignored it. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, matching the pounding of his boots against the wet sidewalk. His jacket flared behind him like a dark flag as he shoved through the wall of stunned onlookers. The woman, her face contorted in fear and pain, was going down, hard. Cole reached her just as she lost her footing. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee, catching her fall with both arms. One hand instinctively braced across her belly, shielding it as best he could. "I got you," he muttered, his voice low and rough with urgency. The woman gasped, her body trembling against his. She clutched at his jacket, fingers digging into the cracked leather. For a moment their eyes locked. Fear. Not just fear from falling. Fear of him. He could see it, raw and sharp. Cole's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He simply shifted her weight carefully, cradling her in a protective hold as he stood. Behind him the crowd murmured, a growing chorus of suspicion and accusation. "What's he doing? Is he trying to hurt her? Someone call the police?" Cole ignored it all. He turned, scanning the street. His Harley was still idling nearby, its headlamp casting a soft golden halo on the asphalt. He took a slow breath, steadying himself against the anger rising in his chest. The woman whimpered softly, clutching her side. There was no time for explanations, no time for pride. Cole shifted his grip, setting his jaw in grim determination. He had to get her help. Now. Cole tightened his arms around the woman, feeling the sharp tremble in her body. Her breath came in shallow gasps against his chest. The wet fabric of her coat clung to his arms, but her weight felt dangerously light, like a paper doll about to be swept away. He heard the squeal of more tires, the sharp whistle of a bus driver shouting something incoherent, the rising tide of voices behind him, some curious, some suspicious, a few openly hostile. "Get your hands off her, mate," a man yelled from the sidewalk, his voice thick with accusation. Cole barely spared him a glance. He could see the woman's face now, pale and pinched with pain. Her hand clutched the swell of her belly, her knuckles bone-white. "Stay with me," Cole said, low and steady, almost a command. "You're gonna be okay." The woman blinked up at him, confusion flickering across her face. He could tell she wanted to pull away, to retreat from the rough, tattooed stranger holding her so close. But she couldn't move. Her legs buckled again. Cole shifted his stance, bracing her against his side. He needed to move, fast. He looked around. A few people had pulled out their phones, some recording, some fumbling to call for help, but none of them stepping forward. No ambulance sirens in the distance. No help coming fast enough. Cole ground his teeth. If he waited, she might lose the baby. He turned toward his Harley. It was risky. Motos weren't made for two, especially not like this. But he didn't see another option. "Listen to me," he said, meeting her frightened gaze. "I'm going to get you to a hospital. I know you don't trust me. Doesn't matter. You need help." The woman's lips parted like she wanted to argue, but then another wave of pain hit her. Her whole body spasmed. She gave a tiny, helpless whimper. That decided it. Cole adjusted his halt and moved toward the bike. Behind him, a woman's voice called out sharply, "Someone stop him!" He ignored it. In 3 strides, he reached the Harley. He eased the woman down onto the seat, gripping the bike steady with one hand. She sagged forward, clutching the handlebars for balance. "You trust me for 10 minutes, Cole said, voice rough, almost pleading. "That's all I ask." She nodded once, weakly. Cole swung his leg over the bike, sandwiching her carefully between his arms. He revved the engine, the sound splitting the thick London air like a crack of thunder. For a second he caught the faces in the crowd, skeptical, hostile, some already dialing numbers on their phones, whispering about the gang biker kidnapping a woman. He shoved the anger down deep where it couldn't touch him. This wasn't about them. This was about her. The light turned green. Without waiting for anyone's permission, Cole twisted the throttle and surged into traffic, the Harley growling beneath them like a living thing. The city blurred into streaks of wet concrete and flashing headlights. Cole leaned forward, shielding her body with his, feeling every jerk and bump in the road like it was transmitted straight through his spine. The woman whimpered again, one hand clutching his jacket, the other pressed desperately to her belly. "You're doing good," Cole said through gritted teeth, weaving through cars that honked furiously as he blasted through an intersection. "Just hang on." The hospital was 4 blocks away, 4 long blocks. Every red light was a gauntlet. Every careless pedestrian stepping into the street was another obstacle between her and safety. Cole didn't slow down, not once. The rain began to fall harder, cold needles pricking his face as he pushed the bike faster. He saw the glowing blue emergency sign flicker ahead like a lighthouse in the storm. Almost there, almost there. He gritted his teeth and willed the Harley forward. "Stay with me," he murmured again, more to himself than to her. This had to work. It had to. The Harley screeched into the emergency bay, its tires skimming over puddles as Cole slammed the brakes. The sudden stop jolted Amelia forward, but Cole was already there, steadying her, easing her down from the bike with firm, careful hands. Rain dripped from the brim of his helmet onto his face, but he barely noticed. His heart hammered against his ribs like a battering ram. Amelia sagged against him, breathless, clutching her belly with both arms. Inside the glass doors, 2 hospital security guards stared, frozen for a second at the sight of the soaked, tattooed biker carrying a pregnant woman like a wounded soldier. Then one of them moved, hand instinctively drifting toward the radio at his belt. Cole didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed through the doors, boots squeaking on the polished floor, voice booming over the clatter of the busy ER. "She needs help, now!" Heads turned. Nurses glanced up from their monitors. A receptionist blinked in alarm. And then came the stares, sharp and cutting. The quick assessments, the silent verdicts written across their faces. A man like him, dragging in a woman like her. Trouble, danger, a problem to be contained. One nurse, an older woman with gray streaks in her bun, was the first to react. She rushed forward with a wheelchair, her eyes locked on Amelia's pale face. "Set her down here, love," she said, voice brisk but kind. Cole obeyed instantly, lowering Amelia into the chair as gently as he could. The woman whimpered, clutching his sleeve for a moment before letting go. Another nurse swooped in with a blood pressure cuff. A man in scrubs shouted something about fetal monitors. Cole backed away a step, hands raised slightly as if to show he meant no harm. He caught a glimpse of a doctor, a middle-aged man in a crisp white coat, throwing him a hard, assessing look. The doctor whispered something to a nurse, who nodded and hurried toward the security desk. Cole's stomach twisted. He knew that look. The first guard approached cautiously, puffing out his chest. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside," he said, his tone polite but edged with suspicion. Cole wiped rain from his eyes and nodded stiffly. "Fine," he said. His voice was raw from the cold and the ride. He moved back toward the entrance, feeling every eye in the room crawl over his skin like insects. As the medical team whisked Amelia away toward a curtained bay, she twisted slightly in the chair, looking over her shoulder. Their eyes met for a brief second. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something. But then a nurse pushed her through the swinging doors, and she was gone. Cole stood there, the sounds of the ER washing over him, monitors beeping, shoes squeaking, phones ringing. He was a wet, battered statue in the middle of it all. The security guard hovered nearby, radio crackling at his hip, waiting for a reason to pounce. Cole bent down and picked up his helmet, brushing a strand of wet hair from his forehead. For a moment he thought about marching up to the front desk and demanding to know if she was okay, but the weight of every accusing glance pressed him down. He didn't belong here. They had made that clear. Without a word, Cole turned and walked out into the rain. The door slid shut behind him with a soft hiss, leaving only the sound of the storm to fill the empty space where he had stood. The rain had thickened into a steady curtain, drumming against the asphalt in a relentless rhythm as Cole stood just beyond the sliding glass doors. His Harley sat alone under a flickering street lamp, glistening with water, the engine long cooled into silence. Cole slid his helmet onto the seat and leaned heavily against the cold brick wall of the hospital, his leather jacket clinging wetly to his frame. He crossed his arms and tilted his head back, letting the rain wash over his face. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered right now. He replayed the last hour in his mind, the screech of brakes, the way she had fallen, the way fear had flickered in her eyes when she first saw him reaching for her. Cole clenched his jaw, his teeth grinding. No matter what he did, no matter how fast he moved, he would always be seen first as a threat. The parking lot buzzed with muted activity. Ambulances slid in and out of bays. Nurses in bright scrubs hurried between doors. No one looked at him now, but their earlier judgment hung in the air like smoke. He was used to it, years of it. The tattoos, the leather, the reputation that clung to him like oil. It didn't matter that he had pulled a woman from the jaws of disaster. To them he would always be the villain. A part of him wanted to storm back inside, demand someone tell him if she was all right, demand they see him, really see him for what he was. But pride held him back. Or maybe it was something deeper, something more worn out than anger. Cole shifted his weight, pushing off the wall. He didn't belong here. He turned toward his bike, the rain sloshing around his boots. He was reaching for his helmet when a small, uncertain voice called out from behind him. "Sir." He turned slowly. A young nurse stood under the awning, clutching a clipboard to her chest. Her scrubs were too big for her, and the rain had plastered dark strands of hair to her forehead. She didn't look afraid, just hesitant. "The woman you brought in," she said, stepping closer, her shoes squelching softly against the wet ground. "She's stable. The baby's okay, too." Cole's chest tightened, a sudden, overwhelming pressure that made it hard to breathe. He nodded once, unable to trust his voice. The nurse hesitated, then added, She wanted to thank you. She asked if you were still here." Cole swallowed hard, wiping the rain from his face with the back of his hand. "Tell her," his voice cracked, and he had to clear his throat before he could finish. "Tell her she's stronger than she thinks." The nurse smiled, a small, genuine thing that softened the edges of the night. She nodded and hurried back inside, the door hissing shut behind her. Cole stood there for a long moment, the words hanging in the air around him. Then he slid his helmet on, swung his leg over the Harley, and kick-started the engine. The bike rumbled beneath him, a steady, familiar sound. As he pulled away from the hospital, the rain blurred the streetlights into long, golden streaks. Behind him, the hospital faded into the mist. Ahead, the city stretched out, unforgiving, unchanging. But for the first time that night, a small part of Cole felt lighter. He didn't need them to see him. He knew who he was. And tonight that was enough. The white fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Amelia lay still in the hospital bed, the thin blanket tucked neatly around her swollen belly. Monitors beeped steadily at her side, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. She shifted slightly, wincing at the dull ache in her lower back. Every muscle in her body felt heavy, worn out, but her mind refused to rest. She stared up at the ceiling, letting the events of the past hour replay themselves with relentless clarity. The moment her body had lurched forward on that bus. The sharp, helpless terror when she realized she was falling. And then, him. Amelia closed her eyes, pressing her head deeper into the pillow. She could still feel the roughness of his jacket against her hands, still see the intense blue of his eyes, clear and steady even as the world around her spun out of control. There had been no hesitation in him, no cruelty, only urgency, only protection. She swallowed hard, guilt rising like a tide inside her. She remembered the way she had flinched when he first reached for her, the way she had recoiled from his inked skin, his leather jacket, his fierce appearance. How quickly she had decided what kind of man he must be. How wrong she had been. The door to her room creaked open softly, and a nurse stepped in, carrying a chart. She smiled warmly. "How are you feeling, Miss Turner?" Amelia pushed herself up slightly, careful of the IV taped to her hand. "Tired," she admitted, her voice scratchy. "But better. And the baby?" "Strong heartbeat," the nurse said with a reassuring nod. "You're both going to be just fine." Amelia let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. The nurse jotted a few notes on the chart, then hesitated. "There was a man who brought you in," she said after a moment, glancing up. "Big guy, tattoos. You remember him?" Amelia nodded slowly. "Stayed for a while," the nurse continued, a soft smile touching her lips. "He wanted you to know you're stronger than you think." Amelia felt a lump form in her throat. She pressed a hand to her chest, blinking back sudden, stinging tears. "Was he—" "Leave a name?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. The nurse shook her head gently. "No, just the message." The door swung closed behind her, leaving Amelia alone once more in the humming quiet of the room. Amelia sat there for a long time, staring at the blank wall across from her, the weight of realization pressing down hard. All her life she had preached kindness. She had taught her students to be open-minded, to give people a chance. And yet, in the moment that truly mattered, she had let fear and assumptions guide her. She had looked at that man, at Cole, and seen not the hand reaching out in help, but a caricature of every warning, every ugly stereotype. Tears welled in her eyes, slipping down her cheeks unchecked. She wasn't crying from pain or fear, but from shame, from the deep, gnawing understanding that she had been part of the problem she thought she was fighting against. Amelia wiped her face with the edge of the blanket and drew a shaky breath. She would not let this moment pass without meaning. She would not let his act of kindness be swallowed up by her silence. There were lessons she needed to learn, and there were lessons she needed to teach. It started now. It started with seeing people not through the lens of fear or appearance, but through the simple, undeniable truth of their actions. The sun hung low over the rooftops as Amelia stepped out of the taxi, her bag slung carefully over one shoulder. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp leaves. She stood for a moment outside the gates of Woodlawn Elementary, her heart thudding softly against her ribs. It had been 3 days since the accident, 3 days filled with reflection, sleepless nights, and the gnawing certainty that she needed to make things right, not just for herself, but for the young minds that looked up to her every day. She took a steadying breath and walked through the gates, the familiar clang of the metal behind her grounding her resolve. Inside, the hallway buzzed with the usual morning chaos, students laughing, teachers corralling groups toward their classrooms, the scent of crayons and freshly sharpened pencils hanging in the air. Amelia smiled faintly at a passing colleague, but her focus was razor-sharp. Today's lesson would not be pulled from a textbook. Her classroom door swung open with a soft creak, and the chatter of 20 second graders filled the space. Bright faces looked up at her, some still chewing on bits of breakfast, some already doodling in their notebooks. Amelia set her bag down, removed her coat, and walked to the front of the room with slow, deliberate steps. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice steady but warm. "Good morning, Miss Turner," the class chimed back in scattered chorus. She let the usual routines slide away for once. No spelling tests, no math drills. Instead, she pulled something from her bag, a black motorcycle helmet, worn and still bearing faint scratches from rain and road. Curious whispers rippled through the room. Amelia held up the helmet carefully, turning it so the light caught the small emblem etched into the side. A set of wings wrapped around a heart. "Today," she said, her voice quieting the room, "I want to tell you a story." The children leaned forward instinctively, their pencils forgotten. Amelia took her time, choosing each word with care. She told them about the day she fell, about the fear that had seized her, and about the man who had caught her before she hit the ground. She described the rush to the hospital, the cold rain, the way the world had seemed so quick to assume the worst just because of how he looked. She paused, scanning the faces in front of her, wide eyes, furrowed brows, small mouths pressed into thoughtful lines. "At first," she said, holding the helmet closer to her chest, "I was afraid of him, not because he did anything wrong, but because I let the way he looked tell me a story that wasn't true." One little girl raised her hand tentatively. "Miss Turner," she asked, "was he a bad guy?" Amelia smiled, a small, bittersweet curve of her lips. "No, Emma. He was one of the kindest people I've ever met. He didn't care that I was afraid. He just cared that I was safe." Silence blanketed the room, heavy and meaningful. Amelia set the helmet down on her desk and folded her hands. "I want you all to remember something," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "It's easy to judge someone by what we see on the outside. It's easy to think we know everything about a person based on their clothes, their skin, their tattoos, their voice. But real kindness, real bravery, it doesn't always wear a friendly face. Sometimes the person who looks the scariest is the one who will protect you when no one else will." The children sat very still, absorbing her words in the kind of thoughtful silence that teachers treasured but rarely witnessed. Amelia felt the tight knot in her chest loosen just a little. She hadn't just learned a lesson that day. She had been given a second chance to live it, to pass it on. She looked down at the helmet one last time, then up at her students with a renewed sense of hope. "Don't let fear decide what kind of person someone is," she said. "Let their actions show you who they truly are." And for the first time in days, Amelia felt something she thought she had lost, something stronger than fear, something more lasting than shame. She felt peace. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.